I'd seen a section on candling eggs in Mrs. Brubeck's book, but I hadn't really read it yet. Why do they call it that? I asked him. And why do you do it? People used candles to do this before they had incandescent lighting. He held an egg up to the cardboard tube. The light lets you see through the shell, so you can watch the embryo develop. Then you can cull the weak ones, if necessary. Kill them, cull them. Remove the ones that don't develop properly. But wouldn't that also kill them? He looked at me. Leaving an egg you should cull might have this disastrous research on the healthy ones. Why? Wouldn't it just not hatch? He went back to lighting up the egg. It might explode and contaminate the other eggs with bacteria. Explode between mushy chick disease, exploding eggs, and culling. This project was turning out to be the worst. Then my father said, "Look here, Juliana. You can see the embryo." He held a flashlight and egg out so I could see. I looked inside and he said, "See the dark spot there? In the middle? In the middle? With all the veins leading to it? The thing that looks like a bean? That's it." Suddenly it felt real. This egg was alive. I quickly checked the rest of the group. There were little bean babies in all of them. Surely they had to live. Surely they would all make it. "Dad, can I take the incubator inside? It might get too cold out here at night, don't you think?" I was gonna suggest the same thing. "Why don't you prop open the door? I'll carry it for you." For the next 2 weeks, I was completely consumed with the growing of chicks. I labeled the eggs A, B, C, D, E, and F. But before long, they had names too: Abby, Bonnie, Clyde, Dexter, Eunice, and Florence. Every day I weighed them, candled them, and turned them. I even thought it might be good for them to hear some clucking. So for a while I did that too. But clucking is tiring. It was much easier to hum around my quiet little flock. So I did that instead. Soon I was humming without even thinking about it. Because when I was around my eggs, I was happy. I read The Beginner's Guide to Raising Chickens cover to cover twice. For my project, I drew diagrams of the various stages of an embryo's development. I made a giant chicken poster. I graphed the daily fluctuations in temperature and humidity. And I made a line chart documenting the weight loss of each egg. On the outside, eggs were boring, but I knew what was happening on the inside. Then, 2 days before the science fair, I was candling Bonnie when I noticed something. I called my dad into my room and said, "Look, Dad, look at this. Is that the heart beating?" He studied it for a moment, then smiled and said, "Let me get your mother." So the three of us crowded around and watched Bonnie's heartbeat. And even my mother had to admit that it was absolutely amazing. Clyde was the first to pip. And of course, he did it right before I had to leave for school. His little beak cracked through. And while I held my breath and waited, he rested and rested. Finally, his beak poked through again. But almost right away, he rested again. How could I go to school and just leave him this way? What if he needed my help? Surely this was a valid reason to stay home, at least for a little while. My father tried to assure me that hatching out could take all day and that there'd be plenty of action left after school. But I'd have none of that. Oh, no, no, no. I wanted to see Abby and Bonnie and Clyde and Dexter and Eunice and Florence come into the world. Every single one of them. I can't miss the hatch, I told him. Not even a second of it. So take it to school with you. My mother said, "Mrs. Burbeck shouldn't mind. After all, This was her idea. Sometimes it pays to have a sensible mother. I'd just set up for the science fair early. That's what I'd do. I packed up my entire operation, posters, charts, and all, and got a ride to school from my mom. Mrs. Brubeck didn't mind a bit. She was so busy helping kids with their projects that I got to spend nearly the entire day watching the hatch. Clyde and Bonnie were the first ones out. It was disappointing at first because they just lay there all wet and matted, looking exhausted and ugly. But by the time Abby and Dexter broke out, Bonnie and Clyde were fluffing up, looking for action. The last two took forever, but Mrs. Brubeck insisted that I leave them alone. And it worked out pretty great because they hatched out during the fair that night. My whole family came, and even though Matt and Mike only watched for about 2 minutes before they took off to look at some other demonstration, my mom and dad stuck around for the whole thing. Mom even picked Bonnie up and nuzzled her. That night, after it was all over and I was packing up to go home, Mom asked, "So do these go back to Mrs. Brubeck now?" "Do what go back to Mrs. Brubeck?" I asked her. "The chicks, Julie. You're not planning to raise chickens, are you?" To be honest, I hadn't thought beyond the hatch. My focus had been strictly on bringing them into the world. But she was right. Here they were, 6 fluffy little adorable chicks, each of which had a name and, I could already tell, its own unique personality. I don't know, I stammered. "I'll ask Mrs. Brubeck." I tracked down Mrs. Brubeck, but I was praying that she didn't want me to give them back to her friend. After all, I'd hatched them, I'd named them, I'd saved them from mushy chick disease. These little peepers were mine. To my relief and my mother's horror, Mrs. Brubeck said they were indeed mine. All mine. "Have fun," she said, then jigged off to help Heidi dismantle her exhibit on Bernoulli's Law. Mom was quiet the whole way home, and I could tell. She wanted chickens like she wanted a tractor and a goat. "Please, Mom," I whispered as we parked at the curb. "Please." She covered her face. "What are we gonna raise chickens, Julie? Where? In the backyard?" I didn't know what else to suggest. "What about Champ?" "They'll get along, Mom. I'll teach him, I promise." My dad said softly, They're pretty self-sufficient. Trina." But then the boys piped up with, "Champ will piss them to death, Mom. Death, Mom." And suddenly they were on a roll. "Yeah, but you won't even notice because they're yellow already." "Wow, yellow already. Cool name. That could work. But wait, people might think we mean our bellies." "Oh yeah, forget that. Yeah, just let them kill the chicks." My brothers looked at each other with enormous eyes and started up all over again. "Kill the chicks. That's it. Get it? You mean like we're chick killers? Or like we kill the chicks?" Dad turned around and said, "Out, both of you. Get out. Go find a name elsewhere." So they scrambled out, and the three of us sat in the car with only the gentle pip 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 from my little flock breaking the silence. Finally, my mother heaved a heavy sigh, and said, "They don't cost much to keep, do they?" My dad shook his head. "They eat bugs, Trina, and a little feed. They're very low maintenance." "Bugs? Really? What sort of bugs?" "Earwigs, worms, lollipollies. Probably spiders, if they can catch them. I think they eat snails too." "Seriously?" My mother smiled. "Well, in that case, oh, thank you, Mom, thank you." And that's how we wound up with chickens. What none of us thought of was that 6 chickens scratching for bugs not only gets rid of bugs, it also tears up grass. Within 6 months, there was nothing whatsoever left of our yard. What we also didn't think of was that chicken feed attract mice, and mice attract cats. Feral cats. Champ was pretty good at keeping the cats out of the yard, but they'd hang around the front yard or the side yard, just waiting for him to snooze so they could sneak in and pounce on some tender little mousy beetles. Then my brother started trapping the mice, which I felt was just to help out. I didn't suspect a thing until the day I heard my mother screaming from the depths of their room. They were, it turns out, raising a boa constrictor. Mom's foot came down in a big way, and I felt she was going to throw us out, lock, stock, and boa. But then I made the most amazing discovery. Chickens lay eggs. Beautiful, shiny, creamy white eggs. I first found one under Bonnie, then Clyde, whom I immediately renamed Clydet, and one more in Florence's bed, eggs. I raced inside to show my mom, and after a brief moment of blinking at them, she withered into a chair. No, she whimpered. No more chicks. They're not chicks, Mom. They're eggs. She was still looking quite pale, and I sat in the chair next to her and said, We don't have a rooster. Oh, the color was coming back to her cheeks. Is that so? I've never heard a cock-a-doodle-doo. Have you? She laughed. A blessing I guess I've forgotten to count. She sat up a little and took an egg from my palm. Eggs, huh? How many do you suppose they'll lay? I have no idea. As it turns out, my hens laid more eggs than we could eat. At first, we tried to keep up, but soon we were tired of boiling and pickling and deviling, and my mother started complaining that all these free eggs were costing her way too much.